is happening, everybody? Welcome into a brand new episode of Crossed Up. I'm Bob Wankel alongside Anthony Sanfilippo. Phillies coming off of a 4-game sweep against a stripped-down Washington Nationals team that, Anthony, has to be one of the worst Major League Baseball teams that I can remember in recent memory. But kudos to the Phillies for taking care of business, doing what they needed to do against an inferior opponent. This team is red hot right now. 5 straight wins, winners of 10, their last 11 games. They're rolling, and the vibe should be 100% all good this morning, and we will talk about why they are. But they're not 100% all good because of a weird day at Citizens Bank Park. And so let's roll through this Pete Rose story. Let's roll through the Alex Coffey, Dan Gelston situation, which you covered yesterday, kind of immediately after it happened, and then we'll talk about the baseball team. So if you want to talk about the Phillies, you want to hear about Phillies talk and on-field play, you can probably fast forward about 10 minutes here, but this is the story of the day as we record, so let's dive into the Pete Rose situation first.
Yeah, and here's the thing, Bob. You know, I was one of those guys who was kind of like on the fence. Should he come back? Should he not come back? I understand why there would be a pushback against him coming back. It makes perfect sense. But I felt like if the Phillies managed it properly and they handled it the right way, which I believed that they would when it was announced that he was going to be part of this, that he would just had him, they would have trotted him out. He would have done his smiles and waves, maybe do that, change the base thing that he did, change first base, get that second applause, and then that's it, and then you let him go. But the fact that they allowed him to actually talk to the media, they had to know that the odds of his foot being inserted into his mouth more than once was high. And so I can't believe that they did that to begin with. And then after the fact, after all of that happened, still put him on TV. Because everything was already out. Alex Coffey had put her tweet out about him calling her babe. And then, we had all put our stories out about, the question from Dan Gelston from the AP that he shot down and, did not want to talk about it. And then his pseudo-apology to Alex Coffey, which was, reprehensibly presented first by him offering her 1,000 signed baseballs. All those things, the Phillies should have just said, that's it. Let it go. And then they put him on TV, and he makes a bigger ass of himself there. At some point, the Phillies need to be responsible.
All right, so, yeah, I'm there with you on this. Listen, I thought about this, and I'm like, wow, they're inviting him. I'm surprised that they're inviting him to this. But I will say, I was there yesterday, I tweeted this out. There were some boos. There were some pretty aggressive boos. But honestly, as you heard those boos, they began to be drowned out by overwhelming cheers and a lengthy standing ovation and even chants of Pete, Pete, Pete. And you saw that again when he went out and changed the base. And so, while I don't think there was enough upside in bringing Pete Rose there, I guess, I don't want to say I understand why they did it, but I get it, because there was a fan base there that was excited to see him, and the ovation would indicate that, hey, there were a lot of people out there yesterday that wanted to see him, and they were happy he was there. Probably because they feel that he's been wronged by Major League Baseball over the past few decades, that he should be in the Hall of Fame, and, people that are 50 and older will tell you that he's the straw that stirred the drink, as I wrote this morning in my story, of that 1980 championship team, and there is some, level of thankfulness for him and his contributions. Okay. So if you want to move me to the point where you say, listen, you can validate his existence at that ceremony, all right, I can go for that. But to make him available and have him so ill-equipped to answer a question that you have to know is coming. The Phillies, if Pete Rose is oblivious to the situation, which, to be perfectly honest with you, I think he might have been. I actually think Pete Rose is so far gone that he was probably caught off guard by the question that Alex Coffey asked yesterday and the follow-up by Dan Gelston. But the Phillies have to know that question's coming. Someone is going to ask that question, and they should. And my response to people out there, like I had someone jump into my DMs yesterday when I talked about the split between the boos and cheers, and they're like, "You liberal social justice warrior journalist." And I got to tell you, like, very few people in my social realm would accuse me of being an ultra liberal guy. Like, I'm not. I'm probably somewhere in the middle there. I would say I'm definitely somewhere in the middle. So I'm like, you've got the wrong guy. I'm just telling you the way I hear it. There were boos, man. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I know that doesn't jive with the picture that you want painted, which is that 50,000 people were giving Pete Rose a standing ovation. But I'm telling you, like, yeah, the ovation was legit. The cheers drowned out those boos, but there were boos. So if you don't think that question should be asked, like, I'm sorry. I totally disagree with that. Now, Pete Rose probably could have handled the question a lot better. He could have not used the word babe, which to me is I think there's a generational gap there and his detachment from reality. But the fact that he was so ill-equipped to answer the question, to me, was not surprising, yet it was. That he was not prepared or not prepped to deal with that. It made him look like a moron, and it made the Phillies look bad, as you wrote.
Yeah, there's nothing redeemable about Pete Rose, the human being. There's just not. He's always been a bad guy, regardless of the whole BS with the gambling thing. I mean, obviously that's neither here nor there anymore. I think, Bob. I mean,
the gambling thing is so diluted. There's a DraftKings sportsbook ad out in right field. I know he bet on games that he managed, and it's different. But that whole thing, I think that the public would have moved on beyond that, which is what
I agree, and that's my point. And let's just for shits and giggles, let's just say that Pete Rose gambled on his team today. Would he be suspended? Yes, probably about a year, right? He wouldn't have gotten a lifetime ban from baseball for doing it. Okay, so therein lies that. So that in and of itself is irrelevant. The problem is that he went so far back in those days of trying to make himself clear his name and lied about it, and then became just this pariah over time, and then eventually it was like he's all about himself and not about the game, not about what he did wrong. He was not. He never really took responsibility. Yeah, he said he's sorry, but I mean it was kind of like a fake sorry. But then 5 years ago, when a story comes out that he's had a sexual relationship with a girl who she claims at the time she was 14, and he claims that she was 16. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that Ohio law allows consent to be at age 16. It doesn't matter. You're still talking about a high school kid and a grown man who is married with children at the time having an ongoing relationship. It makes him a crumb. And so therefore, whether he wants to talk about it or not, if you're the Phillies, you have to look at it in that vacuum. You already canceled his Wall of Fame induction because of it. Okay? So if you're going to bring him back 5 years later, you certainly have to make sure that you are taking a very direct and well-mapped out path with him in the process in order to make it work. Because as soon as you allow for more, you are only opening yourself up to the greatest criticism. If they don't let Pete Rose talk yesterday, you'll get some people criticize the Phillies for letting him show up, but it would be a very quiet criticism. This is not a major story if he doesn't talk yesterday.
I mean, you see it though even today. There's a lot of support, a lot of pushback on what happened yesterday. That this was a team that won the World Series in 1980. The day was about that. It should have never been approached. And I don't know how that question goes unasked. And you commend the writers, in my opinion, for asking it. Now, the fact that
it has to. Go ahead. I don't want to. I know I'm rambling here. I don't want to keep talking over you, and I apologize. But I will say this, as you know, again, I'm always asked with Crossing Broad, many times by you, sometimes on the other shows, as the guy who's been around longest in this field, right? As the veteran journalist, so to speak, those questions have to be asked. They have to, because there is a segment of the and if people don't want to hear this, the people who are supporting Pete Rose don't want to hear this, but there is a segment of the population that is not your segment of the population, people who don't want to hear this, but there is a segment of the population who does not believe that Pete Rose, because of this, should ever be associated with anything in baseball, let alone the Phillies, the Reds, whoever. But he should not be associated at all. And so because that segment of population exists, as neutral reporters, we need to ask.
Right. You ask the question. It's
right.
not... I mean, listen, I don't think there's any good way to answer the question if you're him, but listen, that happened a very long time ago. There's things about it that are unclear. I'm here for the Phillies today. I don't want to talk about it. And, he doesn't have to go beyond that. And, and so he can kind of give that answer that's a non-answer. And then maybe, there's going to be columns, there's going to be opinion pieces, things are going to be written about it, they're going to be unflattering, but then he doesn't have to then compound the situation by answering the questions in the manner that he did. And then that gives everybody the chance that is rightfully, in my opinion, piling on the ability to do so because the answer was just so stupid. His apology was insincere. I mean, it was so predictable that he gave a poorly worded answer that showed really no understanding of the gravity of the situation. And that made it worse for him, I think. And there are people out there that didn't want the question asked, thought it was unfair, that the journalist wants to make the story about her and him in the case of Gelston. That, to me, is all nonsense. The question gets asked. It's up to the subject to answer the question in the best way they possibly can. And I don't think Pete did that, and it's totally unsurprising to me.
And the one other thing I want to say about this is that I'm really glad that Dan Gelston also asked this question.
Yes.
Because if it was just Alex Coffey that asked it, the people who are out there screaming, oh, well, the Inquirer sent her because she's female, and of course they knew that they would get some kind of reaction from Pete, and it was almost like they were goading him into it. There was I heard from some people saying, well, why didn't Scott Lauber do the interview with Pete Rose instead of Alex Coffey? Like, he could have asked the question, and he wouldn't have called Scott Lauber babe, right? I mean, so I get that. It's bullheaded, but I understand why they're saying it. So, but with Gelston also asking the question, it makes it that now you have two different genders who've asked the same question and both got a
I mean, he dismissed it in a similar fashion, though it wasn't a gender-related word. It was, you're not even, you weren't even born when this happened, so you don't get to ask the question. And I mean, again, it's totally dismissive in a different way, but kind of in an equal way. And both dismissals are ridiculous. So, I mean, listen, and then the only other thing I want to just touch on is that I am surprised, as we all were yesterday, that we look up and I believe it was the 6th inning, and then we see Pete Rose in the booth, and we go, Jesus. And if, this baggage and this backstory about Pete Rose didn't kind of carry into this conversation, it probably would have just been a funny inning of baseball. Like, you can debate whether or not the Kruk comment about knowing him when he had 2 balls was funny or not. I don't know the relationship that John and Pete have. Whatever. Like, you kind of just chuckle, like locker room talk, breaking stones, so to speak. But the horse shit thing on the pop up down the first baseline and the flashback to the World Series, and then talking about I think what did he say, a cock-high fastball that he turned around on. Like, all that stuff, you're talking about an 80-year-old guy, old school, like, that stuff doesn't really offend me. But the fact that the Phillies gave him the opportunity to go in there and allow that inning to go the way it did, like, if you're NBC Sports Philadelphia, you probably got what you wanted out of it because you got some stories, you got a lot of shared social media, you got, the internet sprawl that you get when you have that viral type of conversation happen during a game. I guess it could have gone worse. I just am surprised, I guess, that he was given the floor in the first place.
Right, but and I'll tell you what, NBC Sports Philadelphia deserves some blame too. Okay, if they did not have him available to the media, And he didn't say the things that he said to Alex or to Dan at any point. And all they did was put him in the booth, and he said some of those things. We would probably be laughing about it more today, right? It would just be like, oh, there's old man Pete saying some stupid shit, and it's funny, right? Okay? And NBC would have still gotten what they wanted out of it, which is, like you said, was all the viral stuff. But doesn't NBC also hold a responsibility to keep up with what's going on and know that this is now
hours that had gone by where this was a thing that was out there. It's on ESPN.com. Like, this is a national story.
It's national. It was a national story before he went on. They could have stopped it. They could have said, you know what, enough's enough. We don't want to be associated with this. Who knows what he's going to say on our airways? It's not worth. It's the juice is not worth the squeeze, right? I mean, at that point, okay. So in my mind, they get some blame too. I think there's blame everywhere. Obviously, Pete Rose gets the most blame because of the schmuck that he is, okay? But the Phillies get a high level of blame. NBC Sports Philly gets a high level of blame for giving this guy the platform.
Yeah, and I guess I just don't understand when it's all said and done. Some of this was predictable. Some of it was avoidable. And I just don't know what the payoff was. Was it the payoff that somebody that was there that night when they won the World Series in 1980 got to clap for Pete Rose? Like, was it so worth it for the Phillies to give those people that moment and to give Pete Rose that moment that then they kind of have to deal with some of this, the backlash, the stories, some of the negative publicity? And guess what, man? I know it was hot yesterday, and the Phillies have had, like, some better attendance lately, but that was not a particularly well-attended ceremony. So if the payoff was like, we're going to get 44,000 out here for this game, like, I could even go for that to an extent. But they didn't get what they wanted, I don't think, in terms of attendance. You're talking about a surging baseball team that's playing very well, who I think is really starting to drum up some genuine interest in this market. It hasn't necessarily translated yet to huge attendance numbers. I know the Thursday night crowd was pretty strong. They didn't get that attendance payoff, I don't think. And so I just ask myself, like you said, was the juice worth the squeeze? And in this case, I just say, no, it wasn't. So,
it turned out that it wasn't.
That's a team that is worthy of honor. They've gotten a lot of it over the years. They deserve the day they had. I know it was originally supposed to be the 40th anniversary that they were going to honor that team. COVID delayed it.
I will say this, Bob. They really didn't give a lot of heads up to the fans that this was happening, right? I mean, if Boa doesn't say what he said, what was it, a week and a half ago?
I think he was on the broadcast, and it said, Pete's
sorry, people wouldn't have known. Now, if the Phillies had announced back in April or May, oh, by the way, Pete Rose at Alumni Weekend, they probably sell more than 28,000.
I don't know.
I'm being honest about it. I do believe people, if they had enough warning, would have bought more. I think you would have seen, not that it would have sold out, but it would have matched Thursday's crowd. You would have had 35. I think you would have had about 35,000 people. And again, the final thing is, I understand why this was the last opportunity to do this. You're not going to bring Pete Rose back for anything else. The 1980 team, they're getting old.
Yeah, that was apparent. There were certain guys that ran out there. Now, like guys like Boa, they look good. He jogs out. He's looking tight, looking fresh. Some of those guys there, you're like, wow, how much longer are they going to have?
You're talking another 8 years before you can
50th anniversary.
Before you recognize them again, right?
You hate to say it. You hope that all of those guys would be there for that, but it just, math tells you that may not be the case. So, listen, it was a really weird day. I mean, that's what I said. That it was a weird day at the stadium, and maybe like us reporters, whatever, we're a little bit more sensitive to that stuff. Maybe there were just dudes out there yesterday, people out there, fans out there drinking beers and saying like, we clapped for the 80 team. Phils won. They kicked ass. It was a good day. All this is all bullshit, and that's fine. I get that there's plenty of fans out there that feel that way. But when you're in there and you cover it, you consider the way that multiple people feel, because that's what you try to do. You try to take it in from multiple perspectives, and this is a pretty weird day, man. So that'll put a bow on the 1980s Pete Rose media reporter fallout, But listen, as it pertains to baseball, there's a lot to be excited about here. And I know I made the joke last week that you have them winning the World Series. You're right the other night that the NL East might come into play. I think the Mets might have something to say about that. They made a pretty emphatic statement to the Braves over the weekend. But this Phillies team's playing really well right now. Like you said at the top, 5 wins in a row, 10 of their last 11. They are now a second wild card spot. They surpassed the Padres, who got swept over the weekend by the Dodgers. They're nipping at the heels now, all of a sudden, of the Atlanta Braves. And you start to look at all these playoff projections, and we've talked about them over time, about how they're somewhat meaningless. But, I think on the most bullish end, you have Baseball Reference, like 92%. I want to say Fangraphs is a little bit more, I think, realistic, like 73%. 538's 84%. And if you're a bettor, DraftKings Sportsbook right now, will the Phillies make the playoffs? Minus 295, yes. That means that a bettor would have to lay 295 to win 100, taking the Phillies to make the postseason. All of this is to say that when you consider how weak their upcoming schedule is, how well this team has played, that they are in prime position to finally end this drought. And I, a little bit more reluctant than you, will tell you that I'm starting to buy this. And I have said all along I do think they're a playoff team, but now I'm starting to feel like it's not can make the playoffs, not even should make the playoffs, but will make the playoffs.
My question for you, Bob, is when are you going to get on board the fact that this is not just make the playoffs and it's going to be, in and out, 3-game series and see you later and we'll talk next year. I think this is a team that's going to make a little bit of a push.
I would not be surprised if this team won a playoff series. I don't see it in the NLCS right now. I think they have work to do. And I credit this team for what they've done, especially following that Cubs series. It could have been oh no, we've seen this show before. This is what this team always does. They don't take advantage of opportunities. And all they do is they come back, show a ton of resolve, 2 out of 3 against the Braves. 4-game sweep of the Pirates on the road. It's hard to sweep a team in a 4-game series. I don't care who it is, where it's played. It's hard to do it. And they did that. Then they go down, they have their clunker against the Braves. It looks like they might get swept out of that series. And again, just a really, really gutsy win. Castellanos delivers deep, the deep ball at the end. Bullpen locks it down. Wheeler's a stud. And then they take care of business against this trash Nationals team. And I said it to you yesterday. I'm telling you, they play this team 7 more times. They should beat them all 7 times, and I will allow for the fact it's hard to do that, so maybe 6-1. This team stinks. They should whip this team 7 more times if they play them 7 more times.
And I agree. I mean, you always have to leave that room open for one possibility. I mean, even the worst teams in the league win, 40% of the time, right? So every once in a while, you do have that clunker against a bad team, but. I do agree. I think they can go. It's a realistic bet. I wonder if DraftKings would take that bet, Bob. It's like a parlay. Can you bet right now all 7 Phillies Nationals games the rest of the way and pick the Phillies to win all 7?
But what would that payout be? On something like that. I will say, Corey Simon tweeted it out. I know that you've been ahead of this. You look at the schedule, and we talk about the strength of schedule for the remainder of the season, but where it really gets favorable is this upcoming stretch. Although I will put an asterisk on that this week. The Marlins are coming here, and their struggles against the Marlins have been well documented over time. Now, this year, they've had a little bit more success against them, especially the last couple times they've played. However, you do get Sandy Alcantara in this series, and they've beaten him a couple times. You start to wonder, how many times are you really going to beat this guy as good as he's been? So they're going to have a challenge there. And then I believe Cabrera also throws for the Marlins this week, if I'm not mistaken. And all of these guys, younger, but they've all been pretty damn good. Yeah. So, this to me is not a series where you just show up and roll. This is going to have to be like a tread water type series. And then you have the Mets. And you and I'll allow you to give this take. I don't want to steal it from you. But you have the Mets this weekend, and you should have a little bit of a team with some edge. But again, you will see DeGrom in that game, and you will see in that series, and you will see Max Scherzer in that series. So this is a challenging week in terms of the pitching this team's going to see.
Yeah, I'll address the Marlins first, and then I'll get to the Mets. The Marlins, you're right. They're not. The Marlins are not a pushover team. They're not a Washington. They're not a team that you just go in and obliterate. Okay. But you still have to look at yourself and look at them and say, we're the better team. We have to win the series. So if you take 2 out of 3, you're not going to sweep that. You're not going to win every game the rest of the year. So there's going to be some losses. So you got to look at the series and say, we just need to win 2 out of 3. stay on that 67% win percentage that they've been on with Rob Thompson as their manager. So you take those 2 out of 3 and you're happy. Then you go into the Mets series. And you say that, yeah, you know what? They got to face Scherzer and they got to face DeGrom. But guess what? The Mets have to face Zach Wheeler. The Mets have to face Aaron Nola. The Mets have to face a far different bullpen this time around than they faced in the 12 games they played against the Phillies in April and May. It's not the same Phillies team. Maybe the same Mets team, right? And yes, the Mets did make a statement with the way that they played against the Braves.
We've talked about the Mets, and I've said this team looks different, but then you've always kind of been like, they're going to get run down by the Braves, and I've said maybe, like I was starting to come around on that, but this was the opportunity this weekend for Atlanta to do that.
Well, I still think the possibility
exists. The race isn't over. We're talking about what are they, 5.5 back now, 6 back in early August. It's far from over, but man, like that was a statement this week. I'm sorry, they dropped the hammer on that team this week.
It was a statement, but here's why I say that it's to me. I still think that we have time for the Mets to be the Mets that we always know. Okay, when you look at what's coming up for the Mets, all right, they're hosting Cincinnati here these next 3 games. They're going to be fine there. But starting with the Phillies series this weekend, they have 3 at home against the Phillies. Then they go to Atlanta for 4 on the road. They come here for 4 against the Phillies. They go to New York to play the Yankees for 2. Then after a 4-game series with Colorado, they get 3 against the Dodgers. That's a tough road to hoe.
Certainly.
Okay, it is. And so to me, this is the time where I think Atlanta can then get right back to where they were, make that a 2-team race again. But the thing that I wrote the other day, and I'm not going to sit here, I'm not this crazy. I'm not crazy enough to say the Phillies are going to run down the Mets. They're 9.5 behind them, and they're going to catch them. Okay, but if you're 9.5 back and you play them 7 times in the next week, now remember last year when they were behind the Mets, they were 4 games back, and in a span of 7 days they were 2 games up. So they made up 6 games in 7 days. So it certainly is possible to make up ground quickly, especially when a lot of teams are playing each other. So can the Phillies, if they go, I'm just going to throw this number at you, Bob. They go 5-2 against the Mets. Let's just say that, okay? 5-2. That's not an easy number to predict, but let's just say you go 5-2. Now you've made up 3 games. That gets you within 6.5. If the Mets just go 500 against those other games against the Braves, the Yankees, and the Dodgers, and the Phillies keep playing all these crap teams, let's say they make up another 3 games there. They're 3 games over 500 in that stretch. All of a sudden, the Phillies are 3.5 out of first on Labor Day. It's not ridiculous to see. Now, then the Mets' schedule gets a little bit easier after that. All right, so it's not going to be as easy to make up those last 3.5 games. But at that point, you're in the conversation again.
Over the Phillies' next 35 games, 80% of them are coming against teams with losing records. It's only the Mets that are really the one obstacle in this next stretch here. And that's 80% of your games over a 35-game sample coming against losing teams, most of which are not just like losing teams like, we're a game under, but really bad, like 10-plus games out. So, and I think it was Corey Seidman who mentioned that, and then I kind of just did the math percentage-wise off of it. So, I mean, there is an opportunity here for the Phillies to really go. I'm just going to say this, just from, and this is probably the same failed thinking that I used back on Memorial Day, which is they're 8 games under 500. It's going to take 86, 87 wins to make the playoffs. There's just no way. And we found out that that's not true because the Phillies are 38-19 since Rob Thompson took over, which is just absurd. But it's hard to sit back and look at, listen, we know this is a pretty good Mets team. We know the starting pitching it has. 9.5 games, that's a hell of a way to fall in that amount of time. I just don't see it, and that's why obviously you're not going to bet on it. Just to put this in perspective right now, Mets are the overwhelming favorite to win the NL East in terms of betting odds. Braves are plus 650, probably as an acknowledgement that they could exact some revenge in Atlanta in an upcoming series and kind of shave that lead down. Phillies are plus 5,000 right now to win the NL East, so they are still a significant long shot. They've got a long way to go, but like you said, 5 out of 2 in a 7-game stretch would probably get the wheels moving. And the Mets' history of, oh God, here we go again. And they had an okay deadline. They had some platoon bats, but it wasn't an overwhelming deadline. You just never know. but I think we should probably store that conversation on the back burner for at least another week. Let's see what happens.
Well, but you know me. I like to get it out there early, so when it comes, we go back to
the Phillies
hey,
win 90 games, and they're the first wild card team or the second wild card team. Even nobody's going to kill you for that takes. But yeah, I mean, here we are, and you have to feel good about this. And listen, I mean, I know that this always happens. Like, I've got to stop looking at Twitter comments and Facebook comments, but. You know, I write that the Phillies are surging, and invariably on Facebook you see it like, that team sucked. You know, that's what they should have done. And I agree, the Nationals do suck, and it's exactly what the Phillies should have done. But you can't have it both ways. You can't say, in years past this team hasn't taken advantage of scheduling opportunities, when this year they have. I mean, that Cubs series notwithstanding, they have taken advantage of inferior opponents, especially under Rob Thompson. And you have to credit them for that. I mean, we're talking about a team that Thursday night, they messed around a little bit. They probably got helped out by the rain. Okay, cool. But Friday, Saturday, Sunday, they left no doubt. They pummeled that team. And that's what a good team does. Just because you beat up on a shitty team doesn't make you any less legit. When you get to 90, 95 wins at the end of the year, look across baseball. It's not because they played 500 against bad teams and then they took advantage of the best of the best. It's because they do exactly what the Phillies did to an inferior opponent this weekend. So you have to give them credit for that. And if you can't enjoy this weekend as a Phillies fan and say, damn, they're swinging it, this bullpen looks pretty good, this starting rotation's really delivering, then, like, what are you even watching for?
Well, here's what I say to these people, Bob. How many teams are there in Major League Baseball? How many teams right now have more wins than the Phillies?
Five? I thought the Phillies came into the day with the sixth best record. Maybe that's okay.
Well, their sixth best winning percentage. Their sixth best winning percentage.
Okay.
The Padres have one more win than the Phillies, even though the Phillies are ahead of them. But it's okay. But yes, all right. If you want to go by winning percentage, it makes my argument even better. If you compare, every team plays bad teams. Every team plays good teams. The Phillies right now have the sixth best winning percentage in all of baseball. How do you look at that and say, they're not a contender. They're not right. They're still not that good. I mean, how? If they're not that good, what does it say about the 28 teams behind, or 24 teams behind them?
Who is good? The Yankees? What did they do this weekend? Right? Like, you can do that. Like, what do you think is being said right now in New York? Now, like, we've looked from the outside and said, this Yankees team, oh my God, what a good team this is. And they are a good team. And they're going to be there, and we all know that. But in New York today, imagine what's getting said after that series this weekend in St. Louis. Oh my God! Right?
Yeah.
Like, and the Phillies.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, that's why I've been saying.
Yeah, and maybe this week is the week it happens where they struggle again. Like, the Phillies are going to struggle again. They're not going to win 9 out of every 10 games. They're not going to win every single series. Like, there's going to be a hiccup coming. Doesn't mean that they're not a good team. Doesn't mean they won't make the playoffs. But, like, they're going to have a lull here again. It will happen. I guarantee it. And when it does, those people are going to say, see, I told you. And I would just say, like, don't overreact to that one series. Like, on Wednesday night, if they get beat by Sandy Alcantara, I don't want to hear, like, that shows that they're not going to be able to hack it in October, or that this team's going to collapse. Like, if it happens for 10 days, if it happens for 2 weeks, then sure. Let's revisit oh shit, see, here we go, this is what the Phillies do. We can have that conversation. But I wouldn't have it after that one slip-up, which is what I think we said when we watched that game. Last time we recorded, right? The trade deadline. We watched that game in Atlanta, and you and I were almost, like, unfazed by it. As gross as that game was, we kind of looked at it and we're like, I don't know, man. Like, it's going to happen. They just swept the Pirates in a 4-game series. Like, shit happens. And that's kind of where I'll be at probably this week, if they were to lose even 2 out of 3, let's say.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to kind of look at with this team, Bob, I was slightly, although not really surprised, but slightly surprised. We're talking about 24th, 25th men in the lineup or on the roster or whatever. I was slightly surprised that Nick Maton replaced Jairo Munoz. Not because they needed a left-handed bat on the bench, but because we're close to Harper coming back. And when Harper comes back, Derek Hall probably becomes your left-handed bat off the bench. Right? So if that's the case, I was a little surprised by adding Maton too. But now you look at it. Let's just say they're trying to form what this roster is going to look like if they make the playoffs, right? You now have 3 bats that are left-handed on the bench. If you're going with Maton, so you got Maton, Hall, and Stubbs, backup catcher. So that leaves you with only 1 right-handed bat off the bench. It's probably Matt Vierling, right? Is that how you would approach? Is that how you would go into this, or do you think that there needs to be that they need to figure something else out to maybe have another right-handed?
Yeah, it's interesting. Nick Maton is a guy that I really like. I feel like he's a guy that I don't think you can overexpose him. I wouldn't say he's an everyday player or anything like that, but used the right way, I think he's a very valuable piece and a good hitter from the left side. And you saw that yesterday. And he's a guy I want to see play a little bit more. I want to see him get opportunities where it makes some sense. But I do wonder if you start to talk about composing the ideal bench long term, if he would be the one that might be the odd man out. Because, listen, with Derek Hall, I don't think that Derek Hall is a guy that can play every day. I do think that, you see what he is against lefties. There's obvious weaknesses in his game. So, I think sometimes people get carried away. They see the production, they see these long home runs, and they go, you got to find a way to play this dude every day. The question I had about Derek Hall when he first came onto the scene was like, all right, let's see what happens once opposing pitchers adapt. And he had that initial surge, and then you started to see him cool off a little bit. But here he is now. His last 15 games, he's hitting .320. He has a .382 on-base percentage, and he's slugging .700. In his last 7 games, he's slugging .905. That's not OPS. That's slugging .905. His OPS is over 1,300 in his last 7 games. So what he's done now is he has proven that he, if you can configure it, should be in the lineup against left-handed pitchers. There's just straight up, or right-handed pitchers.
Right-handed pitchers.
There's just no, and I know that they're going to face a crunch when Bryce Harper returns. And if Castellanos gets hotter, I would have told you, if Castellanos continued down that same line and you could get Harper out in right field, sorry, Nick, but he seems to kind of be getting it together a little bit here. And I think you want him in the lineup every day. You paid him to be in the lineup every day, so I don't think it's at his expense. But what I think the Phillies are doing here, as you kind of suggested, is they've worked themselves into a situation that they've not had forever, which is damn, we got a really good hitter, and we're just not going to be able to play him all that much. And I think that's what you're seeing with Derek Hall right now.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder where, how this is going to be put together. Obviously, a lot can happen between now and the end of September. But I'm just I'm not sure what exactly it's going to look like going into the playoffs. And do they care? Do they care because all their good right-handed bats are in the lineup anyway?
Well, things have a way of working themselves out as well. I think it's great to assume that they're going to have this surplus of need. That's assuming that everything goes according to a plan. Goes according to plan. There are no more injuries. They get back the Harper. Everything is cool. You hold your breath that they're going to have this problem. It's interesting though. 29 games he's played since he's come up here. And I mean, I know that we said this for 1 week. Remember when he had that first week and you're like, Jesus, he gave them Bryce Harper production for that week. He's given them basically Bryce Harper production now, though, for 30 games. You talk about all the reasons the Phillies are where they are right now. And I think in the first 3 or 4, the bullpen's probably number 1. Starting pitching at the top of the rotation is probably number 2. Alec Boehm, I would concede is 3, I guess. But, Derek Hall has to be right there, man. He has a .282 average over 29 games with a .933 OPS. He has 8 home runs in 29 games. We're there, man. That's basically Bryce Harper production.
It is, and it's surprising. I don't think any of us thought he would be this.
No, I totally dismissed it.
Here's an experiment.
He even hit those home runs, and I was like, ha, this is funny. Maybe he can give you exactly what we're talking about. Some left-handed pop off the bench. That's it. It's a straight match in a game where you want to take a shot. Yeah. I did not see this coming, and I don't think. I don't know. Actually, I don't know at this point. But I mean, this is a good problem for this team to have. Like I said, they have not had it for a very long time, and it's what I include in the story is that we've always talked about a top-heavy roster with the Phillies. You are seeing right now, and we had the same criticism while Joe Girardi was here this season. It's top-heavy. It's just not balanced enough. They spent too much. The money at the bottom of the roster and on the edges, it's just no good. And now you're starting to look at this and going like, damn, this is like a 25, 26 guy deep roster right now.
And really, it's probably even a little deeper than that, Bob, because you look at guys, and I know that he tailed off after a hot start, but you look like a guy like Camargo,
a useful player, like a guy that could play.
He's a useful player. Like if you need to bring Johan Camargo back up this year and play him a little bit, or carry him as on your roster as the 24th, 25th guy, 26th guy, you're not upset by that, right? Like if I would have told you that 2 weeks ago, that Camargo's on your playoff roster.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, we haven't recorded
right?
since Didi Gregorius was released. I'm sure that there were probably multiple considerations. It does not make sense from the Phillies' standpoint. Left-handed hitter, no pop, talking about a surplus of lefties as it is. I'm sure the veteran presence, he's a good guy. All of those things were considered. They probably talked to him and took his temperature on it as well. Like, I think Rob Thompson admitted as much. Hey, like, you're not going to be the everyday guy. We're going to move forward with Bryson Scott. What do you think? And I'm sure he was not in love with that either. But, I mean, Didi Gregorius, the Phillies were able to basically absorb that salary and say, we're just better than we've been. We don't have to put up with this. Like, we don't have to keep trotting substandard play out there. And it's just, that's, I think, a big thing for me. And I know we talked about this at the deadline. Obviously, the results on the field are always going to lead the way on how you feel about a team. But the fact that this team is saying, like, we are going to trim the fat. We're going to tighten up the edges of this roster. We're doing everything that we need to do. We're not going to worry about political considerations with guys like Didi Gregorius. We're not going to worry about financial considerations. We're not going to worry about some of the mistakes that we've made over time, Juris Familia. We're just going to be as good as we can be. And then to see that play translated out on the field, where you're watching this depth produce on the field, it's hard not to feel a little bit differently about this team. And you wrote about it. I tweeted it on Saturday. I'm telling you, Friday night, we have JT Realmuto at his locker, and his daughter's there. He has a young daughter, and she's like wants to go play ping pong, and she's like, daddy, like as the reporters are kind of there. And he, to his credit, he answered everyone's question, was very thoughtful, even with his daughter tugging at his shorts. And I had a flashback. I have a 10-month-old, and I'm like, oh my God, like I'm going to see this first thing tomorrow morning when I wake up too. But you just listen to him talk. And I don't know if you have any other like anecdotal stuff like this, but he's like, we're different. We play better. We've gotten hot in the past, but we're doing it for more prolonged stretches. Our cool-off periods are shorter than they were in the past. And you just got the sense talking to this guy, like, they really believe that it's different. Like, there is a belief, and we'll see. The story's going to unfold as it will. Time will tell, but I do get the vibe that they really think, like, we're a lot different than we've been.
If you want anecdotal, and I think you and I talked about this before, they've given up on forced celebration, and they now have like a real unified celebration. What I mean by this is there's no more Homer hats, no more of that. Okay, you did something good here. Let's mug for the cameras. But what you see a lot now, somebody makes a great play in the field, they're all tipping their hats to each other. They're all clapping for each other, pointing out whatever. It's a very demonstrative group for every little play that is within a game. And it's really that all pulling the same rope kind of mentality that, and as a coach, Bob, even if you're not the most talented team, you could always, if you could get that little extra from the group that really, and it really gels really well, sometimes that's enough of a boost to make you better than a team that's maybe better than you on paper. And I think that the Phillies have that. I think it's a real it factor for them right now. And that's why I'm really excited about, I mean, I don't want to look past the Marlins, but I'm really excited about the Mets series. Because I really believe that in that room, there is a thought that the Mets feel like they're a little bit too big for their britches. They feel like they've dominated us this year, and they can just come in and beat us whenever.
It's going to be interesting.
And we're going to show.
You're going to be seeing a lot of. You're going to be seeing a lot of 99,
I get that
100,
sense.
and 101s, and so like that's the only thing I'll say. Like I agree with you. Like I actually philosophically, I am with you on this point. But premium pitching, and you said it, they got to deal with Nola and Wheeler, and that's great. Premium pitching will often sometimes overshadow the vibe and the feel, and that we're going to get these SOBs and all that stuff. So we will see, and it will be very interesting. How about Bryson Scott, by the way? I want to call this out. Kind of looking at his rolling numbers throughout the season. A couple hits yesterday. Actually, he just missed a few that went to the fence and into the gap yesterday as well, but he actually did this on Saturday night and then got ahead of it yesterday. 204 he is up to, and I actually don't mean to make light of this. This is not like me trying to be a smartass. Like, Bryson Scott's batting average this season, rolling average, had not been over 200 since April 14th. And it's been a slow climb. And he actually nipped 600 OPS last week before dipping back down. But 2 hits yesterday, he's over. And I just think that, again, we talked about why they made the move with Gregorius. The other half of it is I really do think that they're looking at Bryson Stott and saying, like, this guy can play. You look at some of the plays he's made defensively now. I like him. And I actually had a friend, we were talking about Bryson Stott over the weekend, and he said, I've never seen you, especially, he's like, but other writers, other people that watch this team remain as bullish on a guy that has had these kinds of struggles. Like Scott Kingery went through this, and we're like, I'm not sure this guy can play. Mickey Moniak has gone through this in a smaller sample, and we've said, like, I don't think he can play. Bryson Stott, all along, I've just been like, this guy has it. It's going to happen. I know he's got a long way to go, but
yep.
I mean, I think you're really starting to see this now.
I agree. And it's been more recent. It's not been, when you talk about, it's been a slow progression over the course of the year. I think his really kicked in about a month ago. And that since then, it's been like, that's the player that the Phillies, envision him being. He still doesn't walk enough for my liking, but I think that's because he's still a young player and he's learning, and I think he'll get there. But I think if you look at just his last 22 games, he's hitting 272 with 775 OPS. This guy batting 7, 8, 9 in your lineup. And you're happy with that?
You know what's different about
you're happy
this?
With that production?
I know that if you're listening, you kind of go, well, you're kind of picking numbers and picking a sample size that makes your point. What I would say is different about this, and even though it's the most recent stretch of games, you're talking about a young player. You're not talking necessarily about a guy that's a 7-year veteran, maybe turning it on. Like you look at Nick Castellanos, so since the Salisbury incident, he's, whatever. I think it's different when you're talking about a guy that's really trying to find his way for the first time in the major league. And so I put more emphasis on that sample size that you've given than I might for a more established player. I really think you're seeing the light go on. And I know the walks aren't where you want them to be, but you do get the sense watching his at-bats, and I think we've talked about this previously, but you kind of are starting to see more professional at-bats, more grinded-out at-bats, working counts, getting pitches he can handle. You're starting to see the light go on.
Yeah, for sure. And here's something I always look at, Bob, with young players. And I looked at this with Alec Boehm, too, and I'll mention just how good Boehm is just in a second. But I think that young players, what I like to see is, after you have a bad game, have an 0-for or whatever, how do you bounce back? How quickly do you recover? And there were times earlier in the year where Bryson Scott would have an 0-for, and it would just carry on. Like, I go back and look. I mean, just going through his game log. He went 5 games in a row in April without a hit. Then he went in May, I think it was like 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yes. And then in June, he had another stretch that was 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games in a row without a hit. So these things happen. Since July 10th, he's not gone back-to-back games without a hit. that tells you that
Not
there's something
panicking, not getting away
there,
from the
that his
comfort
approach.
zone, not expanding the zone
He's not
as
panicking.
much. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely
Right. Right. There's something to that. With veteran guys, they're streaky sometimes, whatever. But for a young player, I like to look at that because I think that there's something to it because it lets you know where they are mentally. Alec Bohm hasn't gone 2 consecutive games without a hit since June 10th and 11th.
I mean, that's 2 months right there. That's a 2-month stretch.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, those things like I look at that as a real testament to where a young player is with their focus, with their mental approach to the game. And that's something I really like about Bryson Scott. I really do. I think he's a heady player in the field. I think he's really smart out there as well. And yeah, he doesn't ever have that deer in the headlights look, right? He always looks confident on the field.
It's funny because we get into the numbers and we do all this, but
yeah,
you know how I know you know this. I do it from afar sometimes. I do it both ways. Where I go that guy has a winner vibe around him, he's got it vibe. We all do this, I guess. And we have that. This guy just kind of has that loser energy. You know how I feel about Carson Wentz. But I do that as a fan that's a little angry or something. There's other feelings that drive that. I will say with the Phillies, I think it's a little different. One, because we're around it. I mean, we're down there. We're watching batting practice. You watch in the clubhouse, and you just look at a guy, and you kind of just know. And I do this as a coach too at the high school level. You just know that a certain guy has it. When I look at Bryson Scott and the way he carries himself, just the kind of way he moves around, I just feel it. I feel like this guy has it. And again, that's totally subjective, and it's kind of silly. But I think it sort of supports some of the numbers and what you're talking about. I just get a vibe from him where I'm this guy's going to be pretty good. I don't know if he's going to be a 10-time All-Star, but I just think he's a winning player on a good team.
Yeah, it's not silly. I think that there's a lot to it. Body language is a thing. I mean, really, it tells you a lot about a person in what they're doing in that moment. It's not just sports either.
Yeah.
I mean, you can do this in your workplace, and you can see someone's body language and know whether they're overwhelmed or whether they're really producing really well on the job. So I think that that's a thing, and it's legit, and he's got it. You're right. You're 100% right. I have one more thing I wanted to ask you about for Phillies before we get to my one last thing and we wrap up. So Bryce Harper, since we last recorded, came out and actually didn't really give a date, but for the first time actually indicated a rough idea of when he might be returning, when using the word September-ish. When you hear ish, does your ish go forward or backward on the calendar?
Usually forward, to be honest. Usually it does. With him, I feel like there's he likes the storyline. He likes to own the moment and control, and Bryce is a hero. Mm-hmm. So I think he says September-ish, and then when he's back the week before, it sets the stage for damn, he really did get back fast. Look at him go. That's my read. Or do you look at this in a more skeptical fashion?
No, I look at it the same way as you, and I've said all along that my target date that I think he's going to come back is August 26th for that weekend series against the Pirates. Yeah. It will be exactly 2 months since the injury. So that's as close to September-ish. It's almost ish. But like you said, it gets it a little bit early. It gets back a little bit early. I'm going to say one. I'm going to throw one other thing.
I'm looking at the schedule, and I do
one other
wonder
thing
about
with
one
Bryce.
thing. But go ahead.
Here's maybe we're on the same page here. Let's say
we're on the same page. I know
over the next 9 games,
yeah,
things go really well, right? And all of a sudden, that Mets series coming into Citizens Bank Park is a big deal. We already know that the Friday night game's Apple TV, right? It's a national game. I think that now is the doubleheader on Saturday, is that a day night or is that a one single admission doubleheader?
That's split up, so that's a 1 and a
game.
7:15.
Yeah, so it's a Fox game at night, right? Okay. So we got 2 national games in there.
Yeah, I think
Does he
that's
push it and come back a week
really interesting question. I tweeted out a while ago, and I was actually searching for this, but I can't come across it the way I wanted to. It was like the beginning of July, maybe the second week of July. I said, man, August 19th would be an interesting return date. And I actually had someone tell me that was very optimistic at the time, someone that has some knowledge of the situation. But
yeah,
I think it's in play. I agree with you that the 26th feels right. I think they'll try to do it while they're home. They go out on the road after that series. I think they like the theater at that point. I think that looks good in the video yearbook. You know, Bryce makes his return at home. So I think that stuff, it's not the leading consideration, but I do think it is one. And if the Phillies meet things real weird here over the next 2 weeks, and they felt that he could go out there and do it, hell, Phillies are 4 or 5 games behind the Mets, weekend series. They have a chance to pounce and make things real interesting. And they felt that he could do it without a setback. The 19th, I think, comes in play. But I'm right there with you. I agree with your target date. I agree with the speed things up if certain things played out. So yeah, we're definitely on the same page there.
Interesting. It's interesting. I think that's part of the drama here, and it's going to be a part of the fun over the final 6 or 7 weeks of the season.
We know that Bryce Harper owns this fan base and that everyone loves him and the contract. I think despite the results and the underwhelming finishes the past few seasons, I don't think there's any remorse about Bryce Harper being here. If he comes back and, either just puts up banana numbers the rest of the way, and they make the postseason, and B, there's like a moment or two where he hits the big home run, he drives that ball in the gap. You remember a few months ago, the one thing I said when they were really struggling, I said, it's a damn shame because here we are now 4 years into this thing, he's getting a little older, he's in his prime, the Phillies have not positioned Bryce Harper to allow him to deliver those big moments that kind of puts him back onto the national stage where you say, like, damn, we knew the numbers were good. We knew he was the MVP in 21, but, he's also a clutch performer. He now, I think, is going to be given the opportunity. That's what this team has done. They've given Bryce Harper the opportunity to return and create one of those moments that people talk about for a really long time. And if he can cash in on it, man, he vaults to an entirely different level.
I agree. So here's my one last thing, Bob. And this could be way too soon to bring this up, but I'm going to do it anyway. So it's been a week since the trade deadline. Who are teams everybody was talking about?
Well, the Yankees,
big splashes. Trade deadline.
And certainly the Padres, who have struggled.
Padres, sure. Padres, right? Okay. And Seattle
and
went out and they got
fashion, the
Castillo,
Brewers,
right?
In that they made some aggressive moves, and you've seen that team looks a little bit deflated at the moment.
So my question is, and we had a lot of conversations about what the Phillies did and didn't do, or should they have parted ways with some of their better prospects, and then I put it in my story the other day that Abel and Painter pitched back-to-back on a doubleheader and were dominant for Lakewood, which was pretty cool. But anyway, regardless of the Phillies, it's only been a week. How have those
not great
transactions
the
worked
team
out
that
so
I would dial in on, though, most specifically would be the Padres. I agree with, I think, your overall thing here. But I will say this. So San Diego has an opportunity to make a statement this weekend against the Dodgers. The Dodgers also, though, had an opportunity to make a statement against the Padres. And we talk a little bit about, the Phillies getting another shot here against the Mets this weekend, and will they be up for it? I think that L.A. kind of is a team that are listen, we've been one of the best teams in baseball now for a number of years. And everyone's like, oh yeah, Juan Soto. Like, this is going to be the tipping point, the balance of power in the NL West. And the Dodgers are like, not so fast. And they are equipped from a roster standpoint to make that statement. They did it. I will tell you, though, before we kind of like dance on the grave of the Padres, just note that they have 3 games at home with the Giants, who have been horrendous now for about 2 months. They then play the Nationals for 3. They play the Marlins for 3, before the Nationals then go out west and play them 4 more times in San Diego. And we know what the Nationals are. So what I guess I'm saying here is that the Padres have a very, very favorable 13-game stretch coming up here. If they go 9-4 or 10-3 or better over it, I think we'll start to say, like, oh, damn, here come the Padres, look at them. Their schedule does get harder again, though, after that. So, like, they've got to pounce now. Like, if the Padres struggle for the next, 2 weeks, they've got a big-time problem ahead. The rest of these teams, it's going to be very interesting to see. The Yankees, it surprises me. I'm stunned. You know, Frankie Montas, you and I had a conversation at the park yesterday. Because, by the way, Crossing Broad, 2 reporters on hand yesterday. Don't believe, not sure if any other outlet had 2 reporters on hand yesterday. But we were talking about Frankie Montas, and everyone's like, oh my God, like, he's at number 1. Like, he's not. He's a nice piece in a rotation. I think the Phillies would have. We didn't talk about Noah Syndergaard. Like, we were overwhelmingly positive. I have big questions about Noah Syndergaard, and I don't think we're running out of time here, so, like, maybe we'll save it for one more start so we don't look like we're on the overreaction train. Frankie Montas over Noah Syndergaard, I'm in. But I don't know, man. Like, that's a team I thought was heading for 115 wins, and they've really struggled lately.
It's just, my point is, and I always say it every year, and I find this in all sports that have active trade deadlines. Really, the NFL is the only one that really doesn't have an active trade deadline, but NBA, NHL, Major League Baseball. The teams who make the biggest splashes at the trade deadline invariably don't get the big reward in the end.
Traded for Joe Blanton in 08. I mean, that's going out.
It's the teams that make...
No, I know it makes your point because of Sabathia and the Brewers. And because the Phillies at the time got roasted for that.
Well, Sabathia was the big guy, right?
But now, if Noah Syndergaard comes in and does that, and they win all of his starts, and he, quality start guy, 5-6 innings, 2-3 runs, cool. We'll see.
Yeah.
But I agree. I hear your point. I do hear your point.
We'll see.
I'm always just kind of relating it right back to the Phillies going, like, did they do enough? Did they do enough? We'll see.
I also think when you make the kind of moves that the Padres made, you brought in so much. They brought in 3 hitters into a lineup.
It takes some time to get that chemistry.
And a closer to the back of that bullpen. You got to get that adjusted, man. You got to get used to that. And that's why sometimes, like, I would look at the Padres, if you ask me right now, when's their best chance to win? I don't think it's this year. I think it's next year. I think they look a lot better next year, right? But I just think the teams, it sometimes takes that long to get there. And, we can talk about that trade all we want. If the Padres are eliminated in a 3-game series in the first week of the playoffs, we'll talk Juan Soto next year.
You know what I want to see? You know what I want to see? Because you're talking about that, now we're talking about Phillies moving up the wild card here. Like, I'd just like to see some games in Philadelphia in October. Yeah. Selfishly, because, as I always note, and we're getting more listeners, so sometimes I repeat things that have been said in previous shows, but listen, Phillies fan. I grew up as a Phillies fan. My entire family are Phillies fans. And we do the objectivity thing. We just beat up the Phillies for 20 minutes on the show, but it's better for the city, better for us to talk about, better to write about. I'd love to see 45 pack it in at Citizens Bank Park the second week of October, and let's see some playoff baseball, man. It's starting to feel like it's possible.
Yeah, I agree with you, Bob. But at the same time, and I had this conversation with a couple people down at the park this weekend. The more I look at it, the more I think Major League Baseball screwed up and made this new playoff scenario.
Quick, so the top wild card gets the home series, right? Because it'll be 4-5. So if you win the top wild card, you're at home. All 3. That's
For all
important.
three-
We talk
all
about
three-
Phillies being
potentially
3
all
games
3
behind
games.
Atlanta for that now. I mean, that is a really big deal. But yeah, to your point, yes, go ahead.
But here's the argument I would make.
The home team. Yeah, I mean, there's
Who's got
definitely more pressure on that. Yep.
If visiting team gets one game of those first 2,
Yeah.
the pressure is really on the home team. So to me, that favors a visitor because it's only a 3-game series. If it's a 5-game series, I
Yeah,
think it
win or
changes
go
things
home
a
in
little
baseball,
bit,
I
right?
don't
But
feel.
it's only
I'm
a
sure there are
3-game
numbers
series.
that either make me sound like a moron for saying this or back it up, but I don't feel on the surface anyway that a win or go home game 5, game 7 in baseball is as advantageous as it would be in a win or go home situation like in the NFL playoffs. I don't know, in hockey I think it probably helps the home team, but maybe helps
Right.
in baseball too historically. But I just feel like I agree.
Right.
You're talking about a season, 6 months of build-up. You're supposed to get it done here, and I can definitely think about recent scenarios where it has not proven to be the case.
Yeah,
But
that's a 7. I think
series,
it's
you
okay.
haven't caught
Right?
your footing yet. You're like,
I
holy
get
shit.
it. You've played 7
3
games.
days later, 4 days later, we're just getting started here,
Yeah.
right? And it's a game 3. Yeah.
Right, and it's game 3. The second thing that I think has favored the wild card teams is the top teams are now sitting for a week in a sport where sitting is not a good thing. It throws off your timing. It throws off a lot of things. It throws off your routine. And so basically you're going to say that these teams who are the best teams in baseball, and many of them who will have locked up the division way before the final week of the season, right, who have not played meaningful games for maybe a month or more, all of a sudden have to turn it on again in a short series against a team that just came off playing playoff games. I honestly believe this is not. I'm not saying this for the Phillies because I still won't go on this limb. Not yet, anyway. I'm not going on the limb that they're going to go to the World Series. But I do believe that the way this is set up, that one of these wild card teams, one of these 6 wild card teams, is going to end up in the World Series, and a heavy favorite, and the heavy favorites
Very
at
interesting.
home. Like,
Very
what the hell
interesting.
just happened?
Just saying. Okay. All right. Well, sets
Just
up another important. Listen, at this point, they're all important weeks. So I think that I'm probably stating the obvious here, but it'll be an interesting week for the Phillies. Some tough pitching matchups ahead. They'll try to keep this thing rolling forward and then take advantage of a very, very soft spot in the schedule coming up beginning at the start of next week. So for Anthony Sanfilippo, I'm Bob Wankel. Thank you for listening to Crossed Up. Be sure to check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere that you listen to this type of content. Follow along, give us a like, give us a rating, all that good stuff, and we'll talk to you soon.